Well, hello again. It is the three Consulting Amigos here today. We're missing one Consulting Amigo. He may join us a little bit later. Ed Lasik is a CPA and spent most of his life as a COO. He's also been a consultant for many years in the area of taxation, and business valuation is one of the big things. He's quite competent and understands small business. And John Mills is a previous electronics small business owner and years ago, and he transitioned his wealth from that business into real estate and is in California now with us, where he has a group of executive offices. And so he's been involved with small business as well. So together, I guess just the three of us probably have about 80 or 90 years of experience in small business, somewhere in that range. The interesting part about this little group, and including our fourth consulting amigo, is just the raw amount of time that we've been dealing with small businesses, as opposed to, of course, the academic approach. We've seen both sides, and so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about markets and what do you do to determine if you are have a business, if you're starting a business or if you're starting a new product line. How do you make sure that there is in fact a business for you? A successful market is probably the way that I should put that. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that. Of course, the whole point is going to be about customer focus, and we're going to talk briefly about, what products to sell, how to market, skills, planning, accounting, and so forth. But we're going to really talk specifically about, so what are the steps that you take in order to be able to go through this process? So this is a little bit a how-to. So here's some of the things I've come up with, and I'm going to have John and Ed critique this as we kind of run through it real quickly. What skills does a company have? So these are, like number one. And that's really, if you're a small business and you say, well, I'm going to manufacture wheels. Okay, do you know how to do that? What's your expertise? Do you really have the skill to do that? Or do you have people that that are really committed to the company and the concept in order to do that? So many small business people, especially right out of business school, I'm going to go into business, but they have no idea, they have no skills. They don't know. They're not a plumber. They're not a computer expert. They don't have skills here and there, et cetera, but they go into business. How can they be competitive? You need to have skills. Two, what will the cost be to develop, build, and staff the product or service? So this is this is a little bit in reverse. I tested AI on this issue, and they had it backwards. And so I had to write this thing myself based on experience, because they were saying, well, what products should we build? No. You don't build the products first. You find the customers first. You find the problem first. And then before you do anything, you must understand, what is it going to cost? So if you've got the expertise to do a range of things, you're not going to do something you don't know how to do. But then you have to ask, well, what will it cost to develop, build, and staff the product or service? And we'll come back to each of these points. What will the direct costs be once you're ready to go? What will they be to produce and deliver the product? So you want to express that as a percentage of the revenue. So if you sell something for $10, what does it cost you to develop that? If it's $5, then that's 50%. And then you also have to have a good idea of what your company is going to cost to just to keep the doors open, no revenue. That includes rent, and that includes maybe your minimum salary for yourself. And if you've got people who are working for you, those are fixed costs. And then you can calculate a break even. So now the question is, and we're back to the start here, well, where is the market that will support this product? And that's the original question, but it doesn't even you don't even do the market research until you've gone through the first three points, because it makes no sense to go out and look for a market and not have the ability to manufacture it or staff it or afford it. So do this in the right order. Let's go through a couple of these a little slower. What skills does a company have? So you really need to have intimate product knowledge because you have to compete in a market. Any one of these markets, you'll have competition of some sort. If you're going to have an intelligent product and fit in a niche away from, say, some of the other products they're competing with, you need to be able to be smart enough about the product, how to build the product, how to differentiate the product between your competitors, because you've got to have some reason for people to buy. And then, of course, you need to have the administrative and office and marketing skills that you can acquire other places. But it's going to be difficult for you to build a product if you don't have the knowledge and how to do that. Two, what will the cost be to develop, build, and staff the product or service? The way that we really look at this is that you need to have some ballpark of, or as close as possible, but it's gonna be within a range, of course. And you want to carefully consider is to understand the cost of the product and or offerings. This might sound simple, but boy, in some cases, it could be really, really difficult to do. If you're going to make hollow balls that are going to float in water in order to keep the sun off of the water and can keep it clean, as one company that Ed and I worked for did. It seems like an easy thing, but in fact, you've got to have a plastic injection molding machine. You've got to be able to figure out how to seal that. It has to float upright in a certain distance. It can't just be on the top. It's got to fall into the water. Therefore, you have to put a certain amount of water in each one in order to get the buoyancy just right. That's not a small deal. Now, if you have to have that, you've got to consider that you're going to have to spend, what, Ed, $200,000 for a machine,
Yeah,
somewhere
please.
in that range. And so,
You have to have a building to put it in too.
yeah, and a building, yeah.
You have
So,
to have people to operate the machines.
and they have
And
to
it
know
goes
how to.
on and on and on.
So it sounds easy, is not usually easy, especially in manufacturing. Now, if you're going to do a service, say you're going to start a bookkeeping service, well, that may not be quite so tough. You buy a computer, you license some software. You still have to really know what you're doing, of course. You can't just start, but some businesses can start fairly small. But no matter whether it's big capital outlay or small capital outlay, you work at home or whatever, you still have to put your costs in there so you'll know exactly what that will cost you to get up and running, and then what it's going to be ongoing. Um, why? Well, if your product is not differentiated enough, you're not going to be able to compete on price if your price is too high. Most of these exercises will end right here because you'll come up with a price for these particular balls that is $10, and everybody else is selling for $1.95. You're not going to sell any. I mean, maybe if they're gold plated, you might, but you got to differentiate it somehow like that in order to get that to work. So, but that's the point. It ends here and you save the money. Okay. So if you can get past this and you say, okay, I can build these for around $1.50, somewhere in there, I can actually do that. Now, of course, you're going to amortize the cost of the machine over several years of doing this, and there's a risk there and so forth. But you've got to get to this point to say, okay, I think this makes some sense. Now you know the cost so that you can calculate what the break even is going to be. So the way that we do that is to say, uh, you need to look at the direct costs to produce the product, calculate the break-even point. So you do a hypothetical revenue. And this is basically saying, well, we're going from zero revenue to infinity, $1 million. And somewhere along this line is where the revenue is going to be. But you want it to increase all the time. This is not over time, though. This will end up being a point in time. Then what you want to do is you want to take those fixed costs that we talked about, and you want to calculate how many dollars you've got to cover before you break even. And so in this case, if you got up to say this was $100,000, you'd bring in $100,000 and your expenses are $100,000, but you haven't made any money yet because you didn't include the cost to build the product. And so that ends up being this line right here. And this line includes the direct costs, which have to do with revenue. That might include sales commission. It obviously would include the cost to build a product. It's going to include some costs of the machinery that would be amortized out over time, and a whole bunch of other things. And we're not going to get into all of those things unless Ed wants to jump into some of that here. But so basically, you can come up with the break-even point where the direct costs and fixed costs equal the revenue. And then, oops, missed one step. And so theoretically, you end up in here somewhere. And if the market is big enough, then you can say, let's proceed on. Then you're ready. Whoops. Sorry about this. I'm going the wrong way. Then you're ready to ask these questions. Now we're talking the market here. Who are the people who would buy the product? How many of them are there? How much will they pay? Who are their competitors? Your competitors. How will you differentiate your product from the market? What media does the market consume? In other words, if you're talking about a purchasing officer for a big company who buys your product, you'd be business to business, B2B. You need to know the characteristics of the purchasing agent. Who is he or she? How old are they, generally speaking? What do they read? And of course, in that case, they're going to be reading industry journals and industry websites. So you can kind of figure out what media they consume from a professional standpoint. If it's a consumer, then you can take a look at patterns and determine, if it's a sports-related product, determine if they are athletic or not. How athletic are they? And you can determine that through a variety of ways. You can buy data that includes that. You can also have focused advertising with keywords that focus on, say, tennis, or running, or exercise, or nutrition for workouts, whatever your product is. And that way you can identify approximately who they are and where they are. And beyond that, you determine finally what will the messaging be to tell the story. I can't tell you how many times people start right here. Now, we've gone through this whole series of things. And a lot of times they'll go, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this, 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 and this. I'm going to explain the product this way, why they should buy it, et cetera. I'm going, wait a minute, that's the last step. Don't do it first. That's the last step. It's a waste of time to talk about the messaging and how you're going to tell the story until you've gone through all these other pieces. Well, and then how much of the market can you capture? Now, all of these things are really estimates, and they're going to be within a wide range, but at least you can determine if the market is big enough. If your break-even point is $10 million, and you determine that you can only find about $1 million worth of business in that marketplace, that's going to be a bad business for you. It's not going to work. And you need to at least estimate what that market's going to be. Now, you go through this exercise, many times you get this far, and you decide that you're not going to do it because it doesn't make any sense. Finally, and down here, it's not in the white, but calculate the estimated revenue over time. And so the question is, well, okay, I hit break even. I think I can get there, but how fast will we be able to grow this business? Are the number of customers who are going to be interested in the product increase? once they understand how great our product is, will we draw more customers to the product? So those are some of the key issues on where we need to go, how we get started. So that ultimately you're finally to the point, is there a market that will support the product? That's where we're trying to go. Whatever that market is, that's how you end up with that market niche. Guys, thought I would throw that out. Went pretty fast, tried to keep it so it's not too boring. We left out a few pieces of the details on how to do some of these things, but overall, any observations, and I'll take critique now, and we'll see if you can critique better than the AI gave me the answers.
You want to go first, Ed, or you want me to have a crack?
Go ahead, John. Yeah.
So I I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. However, I think the core thing is in the heart of the guy or the gal, the woman who is creating whatever. They come up with this idea of wanting to do something. And they want to do something and it excites them and they figure out they're going to do it. And then pretty soon they think, well, I'm just going to go and make a business out of this. And at some point there's a switch from I really like to do this, I can do this, to it actually makes financial sense to do this. And
Mhm.
I think there's a business there.
Mhm.
I think the hardest thing is to not be in love with your own ideas.
Mhm.
And
True.
and sometimes these ideas are good, really good ideas, but their timing isn't right. And so you've got to sit back and realize that, yeah, I can see this, but right now, not everybody's ready for it. There's plenty of examples for that out there. One of them was back in the early phone days, we used to have phone booths you'd go up to, you put quarters into. And there was a company that started to develop a card that you could pre-buy, prepay phone service on. So you didn't need quarters and you could go out and you could put it in a phone or swipe it after that, and it would give you phone service. And that development process took a decade. And then it took off. And
Wow.
then it became, turned into a credit card like product.
Mhm.
But it took years because the idea was a good idea, but there
Mhm.
was nowhere to use it.
Mhm.
I mean, it was a great, but where do you find these phones that don't take quarters anymore?
Yeah, you got to replace all that equipment as a prelude to the
Right.
product itself.
And it was a brilliant idea. It just was too early for its time. And another one that's similar to that is um, copy machines. This is a classic in the business world. IBM made copy machines that were as big as a dining room table
Hmm.
and plugged into 200, 230 or high voltage, and they were huge and they cost $10,000. And they were approached by a little company, came in and said, hey, how would you like a copy machine that made one copy at a time, just one sheet? And it's only black and white, and it sits on your table. It's
Hmm.
like a briefcase. And IBM threw them out. They said nobody wants a desktop copier.
Right.
Yeah, right. 20 years later, Ricoh, Xerox, I mean, they took off and they actually, IBM stopped making printers. Go figure.
Right.
But you see, so the flip side can happen too. You've got to understand and that's the hardest thing. The hard thing is knowing when to punt, knowing when to hold back. I mean, it's the old,
Right.
how do you figure that out? And it's not
Yeah.
all, is there a market there? Because sometimes there's not a market there, but the market is coming at you. So,
Well, couldn't but I mean, in a way, and this is an important point, you've got to use some common sense as well. You take a look at the market and you say, well, the market right now is for $10,000 copy machines. Okay. Well, we're going to make them, and we figured out we can make them. And so we're going to make them really small and really cheap. And, you go, okay, but there's no market. Well, I mean, but you might logically go through that and say, now, but wait a minute, not everybody can afford a $10,000 machine and they need a few copies. There are tens of millions of small businesses that will pay $1,000 for this or whatever.
well, what
So,
about,
you know,
yeah, you start doing the what ifs. You say, we're big enough, we control this market. What say we at least explore the concept? I
Hmm.
think it's going to fail, but let's at least make sure that we're right. And so they go out and market it. And then you find that every United States military ship wants one because they can't fit a desk, a full-size copier in the boardroom, but they can fit one of these. So they want one and they want a high quality one, and they'll pay you $10,000 for the small one.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
there's a different market that's exhibited. Now we've got a very high-priced small copier market.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's only a few of them out there. They only want 5,000 of them. But, that's a good business if you're
Yeah.
IBM.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, determining the market requires a lot of insight and some common sense as well as the numbers. Because what the numbers do is they keep you within bounds. They give you some, upside downside so that you don't waste a lot of time thinking about something that is just impossible. If you say, well, we're going to come up with this great desktop, machine, and it's going to do 1 to 20, 30, 40, 100 copies, and because it's small, it's going to cost $30,000. Well, you might go, I don't know, that doesn't really make any sense here because they're going to go down to the copy shop because the copy shop's going to buy the machine and that'll become a service instead of a product. So you have to use your understanding of the market as well as consumer
True.
behavior. Yeah, and so it's not cut and dried, but you do need to have some parameters, or you wouldn't have these crazy things. And then on the other hand, you brought up Xerox. Xerox missed on a whole bunch of products too. They had the graphical interface before anybody did on a computer, and nobody understood it until they demonstrated it to Steve Jobs. And he goes, man, this is a good idea. This is what people will understand. I understand that they will understand, but you Xerox guys are too into the details. You've completely missed that this is the future of all computing. You've completely missed that. And they didn't end up building the graphic interface on computers, but Apple showed us the way through the Macintosh.
True.
So, it goes both ways. You can have something and not know how to market it, and then you can know how to build it, and there is no market because nobody wants it. So, Ed, any thoughts?
Ron, I think your presentation is a great way to start looking at a business opportunity because it lays everything on a piece of paper in front of you as to what it's going to cost, what type of capital investment that's going to be necessary, how long it's going to take for you to make a profit. I think a lot of people think they just make an investment and the next day they start making money.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it doesn't work that way. One of the major reasons why companies, small businesses go out of business and file for bankruptcy is they don't have enough capital.
Mm-hmm.
So they started with a good idea. They might have been making money, but they're not making money fast enough. So they run out of capital. And once you run out of capital, I guess you could start thinking about mortgaging your house and things of that nature to get more capital. But you get to the point where eventually you run out of capital and you are left with very few options of what to do at that point in time. So
Right.
that's really important. You have to be well financed in any business idea that you have that you're going to last a year or two before you have to pull the plug. If you really believe in your idea, it's going to take some time to implement it and getting it running again.
Talk a little bit, Ed, about the whole concept of depreciation, amortization, longer term capital requirements, and thinking forward a certain number of years, because I think that's part of the expense that a lot of brand new entrepreneurs don't think of. They know they've got to come up with X amount of dollars, but they don't think about how long it's going to take to pay it off.
Exactly. Well, depreciation normally is a non-cash expense. And that's saying basically you make an investment today and you're going to amortize and or depreciate that piece of equipment over the next 5 to 10 years. So, but you need the money now.
Mhm.
And to get the money, either have money in your bank account or you're going to have to go out and borrow it. So if you could borrow the money, then you got to pay interest.
Mhm.
So it starts to become a very complicated analysis. And so that's something that everybody's got to think about at the outset, whether you really have enough money to pull this off, whether you need partners to help you finance it. And like you said, you have to have the expertise. Otherwise, if you don't have the expertise and you're relying upon somebody else, that's not a good business proposition in most cases. Because no matter what that process is, you're going to have to find ways to make it better. And if you don't understand it, that's not a good thing. The other thing we came up against when we were talking about those plastic balls that you were referring to is that you can go through and do all this analysis and say, okay, we're going to do a bang up job and we're going to produce these for $1.30 a ball, which is better than anybody's doing in the marketplace. But what you didn't realize is that you're up against some very big competitors that have equipment, have the infrastructure that can cut their price to $1 if they have to be able to absorb their variable costs. And where do you go from there?
Mhm.
You're kind of out of luck because you can't compete.
Yeah,
You
it's a good point which we didn't cover, and you're talking about the price changes, in that I mean the dynamics of the price actually change the supply and demand. So if you lower the cost of the balls, then maybe people will buy more of them and you'll actually have more volume, and more volume helps you to cover those long-term costs. If it's priced right, helps you to cover the long-term cost of the machinery, et cetera. And so the cost and the pricing is a uh, very tough thing to really do. And that I think is the reason why the number one point is you better have the skill set, the knowledge in your industry so that you don't get blindsided by these fairly straightforward things. It's like, well, of course somebody can be bigger. And if they decide that the market is bigger than you've decided it is, by lowering the price, they'll just throw all that weight into that, lower the price, increase the market. And now you're sitting at a place where you're going to lose money unless you compete at that level. And now you've got to put more investment into faster machinery, et cetera, in order to even stay in the market. So it's kind of an interesting problem, and it's always changing. It's
Yeah,
constantly changing.
one of the challenging aspects behind all this is trying to pick the right machine. And a lot of times entrepreneurs pick the wrong machine. They pick the machine that's the cheapest, probably the oldest, and it costs the most to produce a widget. Whereas if they would invest it in new technology, more efficient machines, you would be able to cut your costs significantly per item, per widget. So then if you buy the older equipment, then there's usually more maintenance involved. You have to have specialized people to keep the machines up and running. And then you're competing against a competitor that has the faster machines
Mhm.
because they have more capital, they have more money
Right.
behind them. And so it's a situation that's very hard to be able to win in that scenario.
Yeah.
And we found that out. That was the case.
Well, we did find that out, didn't we?
And then they buy the old equipment and they incur all this debt and then they have all this interest. And then they're trying to compete against someone who's got the best machines, the fastest machines, and they don't have debt. They've been in
Yeah,
business a long time and they have a strong infrastructure. How are you going to be able to compete in that environment?
that's right. That is exactly right. One of the things too that kind of reminds me of is this known in economics as well as in marketing is the S curve. In other words, you can draw an S that starts at the bottom and goes up really fast, and then it evens off. So it starts slow, goes fast through the maturity of the product, and then it evens off as it is a mature product. And so while every product has this sort of life, it's not a cycle, but this lifeline trend. And so, you start off with something we talked about jobs. I mean, the very first personal computer, they only sold a few of them. And I mean, maybe a million of them or something like that in the first year or 2 or 3 years. And, but by 5 or 6 years, their company had quadrupled or whatever, and I can't remember the exact numbers. But so what had happened there is that you've got this incredible slow build, and then it goes crazy fast. And then now look at it. Computers are flat. They're just growing at the size of the state of the economy, maybe 3% a year, maybe not that much. AI is, on the front end of the curve. It's exploding. It's going to slow down just like networking did. You remember the company Cisco? Cisco was the um, um, in the NVIDIA company of the past. They used to be supplying all of the stuff for networking and the internet, and they just went crazy and they made lots and lots of money. Well, they've been flat for 10 years, 12 years, because the infrastructure was in fact built and some technology changed and so forth. Now they say they've got special switches that will go into these big processing centers for the cloud that AI is going to work on. And so now maybe they're going to see another life cycle. But even if you're making something small, you're going to have some kind of a life cycle. And as you have, if you are successful, and I think this is kind of where or I'm supplementing your comment, Ed. If you're successful in something, people will copy it. And now you have competitors because they see you making money doing it. So businesses need to be ready for that. And when I was in the retail business and did design work, we were fortunate enough to hit on a couple of items that were very specific, branded items that were specific and one style only, one style, period. And they took off to a degree to where they went from selling a few hundred to many millions across the world. And we had to work hard in order to maintain the aura of being the original designers. And ultimately, what happened all these years later, there are 1,000 people that make the style. And the original company is not even known by young people today. It came and went. It was a 10-year, 12-year flash, and it's over and done. Why? Because everybody copied it, because it is a universal style today that everybody knows about. And those kinds of things happen, and you can be brilliant and come up with something totally unique and still have that market taken away from you. And you have to think about those things. Now, of course, you're just trying to get into business. If you get the 4 or 5 years, you're pretty happy just to get started and hopefully to make some money. But know that most products have a life cycle, and most of the time they die eventually. Now, well, talk about nails. How long have we had nails? We still have nails, but the truth is, when was the last time you actually pounded a nail with a hammer? You've got nail guns, you've got stapling equipment. Now we have these great screws that are way better than nails. So even the nail has had a 3 or 4 or 5 or 1,000-year market that is actually dwindling now because there are better ways to fasten things together.
So
Ray,
Ron,
good to see you, sir. We're
so
talking.
Ron, would you say that to be successful, you really have to know what your customers expect from you and how you can make their lives better with
Oh,
any
yeah,
type
sure.
of continuous improvement.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And you do that once you get started, you do that by continually paying attention to the customer.
I think you retain your customers because of doing that. I think
Hmm.
that's a relationship of trust and integrity. I mean, you expect people to grow with the market. You end up buying a product line because you value the product line and they've got something innovative. And then if they don't continue to be innovative and if you don't continue to have a high quality product, at some point you end up moving on. So I think a lot of us stay the course. We keep Apple or whatever it happens to be, Windows, because we've had a good run.
Hmm.
People buy Ford, people buy GM, people buy Dodge. I've happened to have a really good Ford truck that I love to use. Well, I'm all in favor of Ford trucks because my experience with Ford trucks has been good. Well, I got friends who love Ram trucks,
Hmm.
and another friend who loves GMC. So, which is the best truck? Well, if you've got a good relationship and it works well for you, then you stay with it.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my farmer uncles and grandfather used to argue about whether it was Ford or Chevy,
Yeah,
which
there we
was the
go.
best pickup. And I mean, it was a tough argument. They were just so pro or con. It was amazing. We'd have arguments around the table over those two trucks.
Yeah, well, let's look at one more item which we haven't mentioned, and that's regulation. So
Mm,
let's assume that regulations change and you can't have a Ford truck any longer. A gas engine, you have to have a battery to
yeah,
run your truck. Look how that changes the dynamics of your business.
yeah,
And,
yeah. It
and then
really
you find
changes.
out you have to pay 4 times the price for a truck than what you used to pay. And
Yeah,
you have to have infrastructure to recharge the batteries. And
Yeah.
they go a certain distance and you only can put a certain amount of tonnage in them.
yeah.
So
So the other side that
regulation is really important.
it really, really is, and along with that, Ed, I'm glad you brought that up, is tariffs. I grew up in a country that was exceptionally tariff controlled. New Zealand does not create a lot of raw material except, wood and oil and gas and a lot of
Fish,
farm, a
a lot
lot
of
of
fish.
a lot of fish, and also a lot of whey, a lot of milk, a lot of
Yeah.
cheese. So
Mhm.
everything electronics has to come in, everything, automotive has to come in. When you put tariffs on all those, you then have a resulting number of businesses that take a long-term business objective based on the tariff. And then all of a sudden you take the tariffs away and they all collapse and they all fold. So if you're in a highly tariffed environment, my advice would be wait, don't do it because it's probably going to change. And so that's one of the problems that we have currently in this country is that tariffs, which were a very good blunt object for getting somebody's attention, have regrettably stopped people really fully involved. How many solar companies are investing in solar right now in America? Well, they're sitting back and going, let's think, we'll buy them from China. Well, China's the beneficiary of that.
Yeah,
They are going to become the prime source for solar
yeah,
because nobody in their right mind would create a company to make solar panels in the US right now.
yeah.
And if they are, they better be very, very high performance, very niche oriented, and have something that is clearly better than anything else on the market.
And of course, several states, California being sort of the leader, have through regulations, they have changed the market substantially. And in the solar business, as soon as they changed the regulation, which just went into effect this year, on how much the power you generate from your solar installation will be sold back to Edison Electric, or the one up in the north. Well, that completely changed the dynamics. It changed the break-even point that we kind of went through. Now, you didn't do anything different. All you did was try to install solar power. You bought it from China or wherever you did the job, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, the break-even for the customer changes, and now customers make a different decision.
That's
So
exactly right. That's exactly what happened in California.
you bet. And
The
so,
state that promotes the solar
mhm,
uh, actually made it not in your best interest to go solar.
they turned around and they killed it. And I
They killed it.
understand that, and I can't, I'm not going to say exactly because I'm not sure I remember exactly, but the number of businesses that were doing installations in California, not counting new houses, but retrofit, dropped like in the 40, 50, 60% range in terms of the number of companies that were in business overnight. And so now you can only really do business with the ones that can differentiate themselves, or the really large ones who have huge amounts of money to mitigate that. Then you have the batteries that are brought back in that changes the dynamics of the break even completely again. And so if you had decided to get into the solar business, as one client that I had several years ago did. He was a roofer, and he just saw the solar business as a bonanza. Now, in his mind, because he was a roofer, uh, everything was about penetrating the roof and not being able to seal it properly. That was his mindset. So he goes into business, and that's his differentiator. It worked. He did quite a few jobs. But that didn't mean he knew anything about batteries. It didn't mean that he had the right electrical background to be able to do that. And so as a result, I mean, you've got people who are in and out of business because it changes enough and your expertise no longer matches the marketplace. So you have to keep up. And so when we say, hey, the first thing that you put on your schedule of to-dos is you've got to know and understand that product. Well, you have to understand the product, its competitors, and its future in order to really make good decisions about whether or not you ought to be in business or add a product line, because government regulation instantly changes the market. And it's the market that gets affected, and people make different decisions as a result.
Ron, you usually mention one other item, and that is when you're picking a business and you're looking at a market, can you be the number one or number two provider?
Uh,
You haven't mentioned that today.
yeah,
That's
good
a good
point.
way of looking at it because you want to be in that position, whatever your expertise are.
Yeah, very good point. It's the driver, really, and I should have included, I think I better go back through those slides and add that. That's called the PIMS principles. It was a study that was done many years ago. It's still not well known at all. There was a book that was out of print. I happened to get a copy of it, long out of print. Somebody a consulting company came along, bought the rights, and really literally bought all of the used books on PIMS that they could, because they wanted to utilize that as their whole consulting model. Basically, what the PIMS rule says is that if you're number one or number two in the marketplace, you can support yourself through volume, because you're number one or number two. Now, what happens is that the number one spot has twice as much of market share as the number two spot. And then on down the line, number three only has half as much. Actually, three, four, five, six only have half the market share of the number two spot. So if you start at 50%, and now you're down to 20, 30%, that's 80% of the market. Hey, everybody else gets to split up 20% of the marketplace. So that's the way most markets work. I've spent years looking at markets to determine if, in fact, it is true, and it almost always is true. And that is probably because if you own a large percentage of the market, you do have the volume. You can buy that machine to make the balls faster and better and without labor, and therefore you maintain your position in the market. And so that's a very important thing. The reason that you look at a small market is so you can control that small market. And you're right. That was a very important point. Thanks for bringing that up, Ed. Yeah. Some ending thoughts on this topic, gentlemen, and we'll see if somebody can say something so profound that we'll have to stop. Ray, tell us something profound.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, since I got into this conversation late, I'm just going to have to sit here and smile.
Well, you look good. You look
Well,
good.
thank
Man.
you.
Thanks.
I did want to ask John because I'm sorry that this is tangential, but he brought up the issue of tariffs, and of course, we're kind of struggling a little bit with that today. What was the impact in New Zealand? Was that before you left or after you left?
Well, so tariffs had been a forever thing in New Zealand, especially in the white goods environment, meaning refrigerators, freezers, dryers, because everybody needs one, right? And why are you gonna import every fridge you ever made? So there's a company called Fisher and Paykel that was a very major producer of refrigerators and washing machines and dryers, and they had about a 30% tariff on anything coming in from overseas. So if you wanted Samsung, Fujitsu, Siemens, Bosch, um, it was going to cost ultimately an uplift of 30%. So they were more the elite users. So the short answer was Fisher and Paykel did well until in the 80s, the government took tariffs off them completely. And overnight, their product was overpriced and underperforming, which was a good thing for the New Zealand consumer, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, they were one of the few that survived. In that period of time, over 50% of small businesses went out. And in fact, it's a textbook case on governmental tariff regulation change. You can just go look at it in the 80s. Several economic books have been written about it. But what happened to Fisher and Paykel is they were a pretty advanced engineering company and they had already automated their production lines. They didn't know how much of an event this was going to help them with. But they were going for efficiency because they're already fighting off the better products from overseas. So they had used things like QR codes and data codes on every product. So as it went down the line, it got dealt with as a unit volume one. Well, overnight, their engineers came back and said, we can turn this thing into making each individual product uniquely for our end customer. We don't have to bulk make things. We can differentiate ourselves. So they went out and they sold this idea. Here's your 12 cubic foot refrigerator. You can get it in green, white, cream. You can get it with a butter warmer. We love butter warmers in New Zealand. You can get it with a cool drawer or an ice maker. And they had all these options. Well, they found out people really loved it. And so now they ordered their own from the factory, and it took a week or 2 weeks to get there. So they got exactly what they wanted, how they wanted. Well, then out of that, what happened is Fisher and Paykel became exceptionally good at manufacturing flow and design. And they ended up becoming a design engineering company that now the General Electric plant in Louisville, Kentucky, when they went through a worldwide search for who's going to automate our next generation of plant, and they were up against Fujitsu and Bosch and Siemens. Guess who won the contract? Fisher and Paykel. So
Wow.
they were the winner. Now the sad ones are there were several automobile manufacturing sort of enterprises. They all just went gone because they weren't making a really good product anyway. And the 30, 40, 50%. So tariffs, when they come on, mandate lay and they come off, they absolutely devastate any investment in 5, 10, 15-year products and development.
Yeah.
So I'd say
Yeah.
be very careful. It's a dangerous tool.
It very is, and for those reasons, Ray, you're right to bring it up. I mean, we're going through this now, and many industries are having to deal with these changes, and whether tariffs are a good or a bad thing, or balancing them, which brings us closer to free trade, I think is a good thing. But it doesn't matter if the changes are rapid. Some market gets changed. And of course, that's what Trump is all about, is changing the market so that we can bring those markets back to this country. steel and pharmaceuticals, et cetera, things that we can make. And in some cases, we'll pay more for that for I hope for national security. I think that makes sense. But on the other hand, we may be paying more on other things, many things that we can't possibly know or understand.
Well, and maybe we're not paying more, but we have an undependable supply chain. For those of you in the electronics industry, you used to be able to buy power supplies and power packs that were very predictable. They were made in America, they met UL, CSA, and you bought one, it would run for 10 years. I mean, it had, 20,000 hours of life out of it, or 10,000 hours of life out of it. Now, if you want to buy a little power supply, well, I got one here. I just bought this pocket project. It's a little power over Ethernet power supply, 48 volts. This is brand new, 2 weeks old, failed after 2 weeks. Now, I have never had an American-made product that does that, but here I am. I'm buying this product made in China, and sadly, it's gone within 2 weeks.
Well,
But you bought the 3-week warranty, didn't you?
Yeah, well, and so we used to have UL, CSA, and all of these approvals that people thought were onerous, but what they did is they gave you a predictability of life. And now we're buying things that they look the same, they perform the same, they get written up. It actually looks quite nice,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have all of the approvals. That's just the way it is.
Well,
Well,
and if I can say this, I think one of the issues with regulation, there are some regulations that are important to have, and there are others that are not, and part of what you just identified there's one that we should honor.
that's right. Yeah, and along with that has not well, I guess it does have something to do with the market. Along with it, I sure wish Amazon would tell us the country of origin, because we cannot make decisions like we would like to. In a store, it's required to tell you what the country of origin. So on the product, it's required, but you can't determine that from Amazon.
Well,
That is a
20 years
major
ago,
problem.
there was a very interesting trick that was done, and there was a city, I think it was in Japan, that was called USA.
Oh, yes, yes,
Remember that? And so
yes.
these products would come out
Clever.
made in USA.
You said,
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
And so, I mean, there's more than one ways of skinning the cat, and that
That's
was not
right.
the right way to do it. But you
Interesting.
had to give the boys, the creds, because they knew that people wanted made in USA.
Yeah.
And we still do.
Very good. And we still do. So, well, there it is. There's the profound statement that we can end on. Made in USA.
Made in
Thank you,
USA.
gentlemen. Good program. Appreciate your comments and your insight. We will see everybody next week.